Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jackson Cody. I'm a reporter with MassLive, and I'm here today with Northampton Mayor David Narkewicz, who, after serving 9 years as the community's chief city official, announced yesterday he won't be seeking re-election in November. Mayor, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jackson. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, I wanted to start off by first asking you about your reasoning for not seeking re-election to a fourth term. You said in your statement yesterday, announcing your decision not to seek a re-election, quote, "When I first announced my candidacy for mayor of Northampton back in March of 2011, I said it was time for a new generation of leadership to move our great city forward. Now, after what will be a decade of significant work and progress for Northampton, the time for new leadership has come again." Please elaborate.
Yeah, that's exactly what I did say almost 10 years ago when I did announce my candidacy. And Northampton has been blessed to have a really great succession of leadership over time as mayor, and I'm honored to have been part of that tradition and to have held this office. It's been an incredible job, incredible challenge, and I'm always feel honored every day that I walk into City Hall to represent the people of our city. But I reached a point where taking stock of my service to Northampton, which not only includes what will be 10 years as mayor, but 6 years as a city councilor, city council president, serving on citizen appointed boards like the zoning board and the transportation and parking commission, that I'd given over 2 decades of service to the community, and I believe strongly in local government, and it's a place where regular residents and citizens step forward to help lead their community, and it felt like it was a good time for me to step away and to let someone else step forward and take over leading this great city forward.
Absolutely. And you're leaving office during likely your most challenging past year as mayor amid the coronavirus pandemic, which has been abnormally challenging for local officials like yourself. And it has hit Massachusetts hard. While Northampton has seen, fewer infections, hospitalizations, and deaths from COVID compared to other Massachusetts communities, the city hasn't been immune to the financial toll of the pandemic. How do you feel about the state of the city as you're leaving it? And what ongoing initiatives do you have in the works to help combat the impact of the pandemic? Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. And, as I've been telling people for the last, 24 hours or so, I'm not leaving tomorrow. I still have one more full year in office. So, and job one will continue to be helping to guide the city through this pandemic. And I'm, give great kudos to the team here. We've really worked well to keep our community safe, and we've actually been leaders in the region, leading a bunch of regional initiatives around contact tracing. We're going to be doing vaccinations for first responders next week, and but obviously there's been economic impact as well. Obviously, not only here but across the nation. We have businesses that have had to close. People that have been out of work. So that's also been part of the city's response right along. And we're going to continue that now into 2021. We're hopeful that the new administration in Washington is going to finally release some funds to states and to cities, something that was not included in this last package. But we're certainly going to be working double time to support our local businesses. I know, Jackson, you covered some of the work we've done around outdoor dining and helping support businesses that way. We've, reduced licensing fees in some cases. We've tried everything we can to support them, and we're going to redouble those efforts. We're even beginning the process of applying for some grants that are specifically focused on post-pandemic economic planning. So yes, that will remain sort of the front burner issue for me as I finish out this year. And, I feel like Northampton is in a good position. We certainly, as a city, we're in a strong financial position. And I do think that Northampton, the city, our downtowns, we have a really a strong support system for local businesses here in our community. The public has really responded during the pandemic to supporting our local businesses. We've even had local businesses open during the pandemic. We've had several new restaurants open, in Florence and in Northampton. So I still think, all things being equal, that Northampton is still seen as a place that is vibrant and people, want to open a business. And so, I think we'll be well positioned, but it's going to definitely take some support, and it's going to take a team effort between government, the business community, and consumers to help bring back our local economy.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned, you've got quite a bit of time left in office. The general election for the mayoral race isn't until November, and the leadership doesn't change hands until January 2022. So I think that's worth noting. Back to the financial toll of the pandemic on Northampton. How has the city's operational budget been impacted this fiscal year? What's the impact looking like for the upcoming fiscal year once you leave, office?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Talk about how quickly things can change, and that's something I'm used to in this job. But we were in the early part of 2020 going through a pretty extensive community conversation about renewing a fiscal stability plan that I had created back in 2013, and we basically had an override on the ballot, and we had worked on this combination of the voters providing us with additional revenue to extend a multi-year plan that we've been operating under for the previous 7 years. That plan was successful. The voters adopted the override, and then within a week or two, the pandemic had struck. We'd shut down, businesses were closed, people were out of work. So we suspended that. I suspended the implementation of that override for 1 year, and we really put together a very austere budget for FY 2021.
I remember you saying at the time that you're expecting a recession to come.
Exactly. So we basically essentially, nearly level funded. Actually, our budget in 2021 was lower overall than our budget in 2020. We implemented some layoffs. And we definitely made some projections knowing that a lot of our key revenues like hotel motel revenue and meals tax and parking and some of our other key revenues would be down. So we did some of the work in 2021. And obviously this 2022 budget, which again, I'll be my 10th and final budget that I'll be responsible for creating and presenting, we'll be looking at how we bring back that stability plan and use the additional revenues and look at our reserves and try to put together a budget based on our best predictions of revenue that we think will be able to maintain services. Fortunately, I believe we have been able to maintain our city services, and we've used CARES Act funding, federal funding to help support some of the emergency response to the pandemic. In some cases, some of the layoffs that we did were because, our senior centers closed. And so we had some part-time staff there that simply would not be going to work and working. So, we're going to need to try to think about post-pandemic and rebuilding some of those items in our budget. But I feel like we're in a really good place. I mean, I talked a lot during the override campaign about the importance of having reserves and rebuilding our reserves. And there was some skepticism, and obviously, you're trying to plan for the unknown. Well, little did any of us know that, we'd be facing a global pandemic. But, the fact that, we have those reserves, Standard & Poor's, who we just met with recently, and they basically, affirmed our AAA bond rating. Because of the fact that we even in this economic downturn, we've been careful, we've been strategic, we have a plan, we've stuck to the plan, and we have really good reserves, which will help us get through these tough times, just like our reserves, got us through the Great Recession right before I came into office.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned before, numerous businesses have closed down. Some have opened up during this time. And Northampton is sort of in this unusual position of having so many locally owned, resident owned small businesses. It's really reliant on that fact with its charming downtown and downtown Florence area. The ongoing, like I mentioned, the ongoing public health crisis has led to numerous businesses in the city shuttering. The Artisan Gallery, Silverscape Designs, Bistro Le Gras, to just name a few. You introduced multiple city grant programs early on in the pandemic to help businesses, but obviously as the public health crisis has progressed, the level of aid has fluctuated, and like you said, you're potentially expecting more aid from a new federal administration. And you've expressed with me frustrations about the lack of federal aid. Are those frustrations still present now? And what are some of the local and state efforts going on? I know you already elaborated on this, but can you elaborate a little more?
Well, I know it was especially frustrating to, in the negotiations recently over the federal bill, the extension of unemployment and some of the other, the so-called stimulus bill, the $600 checks that were agreed upon. But, the fact that the hopefully soon to be former Senate Majority Leader was basically blocking any direct relief to states or to cities just was, I was so infuriating because I'm not sure who he thinks his constituents are and the communities that he represents in the Senate, but they're cities and towns, and they're the ones on the front line. So, we, as soon as we got federal funding the last time, we pushed it out the door as quickly as we could to our small business community. And we've also, worked with our partners at the chamber. They did a major fundraising effort to support local businesses as well. We're doing buy local campaigns, but I'm hopeful that, one of the first items on the agenda of the Biden administration will be to really work on a serious stimulus package to support, restaurants, to support retailers, local cities and towns who've lost revenue. I know
performance venues, that's a big part of Northampton as well.
Exactly. I mean, that's a big, our arts and cultural facilities, our cultural economy, having things like the Academy and the Calvin and the Parlor Room and all these other venues, which are such an integral part of our local economy that bring people here and they spend dollars. These are institutions that are going to need support. And, this is a once in a, century calamity, really. And so we have to treat it like that. And, it'll mean an infusion of money. But if we don't, it's going to be hard to bring back these things if we let them basically drown in the economic misery that they're facing right now. So I'm hopeful. Congressman McGovern's been championing a restaurant bill in the Congress. And because restaurants are obviously really vital in the Commonwealth and especially here in Northampton, and it's a public safety issue. Like we don't want people dining in person, but at the same time we don't want restaurants to go out of business. So we should be, if we're going to make those public policy choices on a health basis, that we need to support those businesses to get them through this period, so that they can reopen once it's safe and once people are vaccinated. So. So I'm going to continue to aggressively lobby for federal and state support. And I know in the wee hours this morning, the state the state legislature, I believe, finally passed the economic development bill that the governor had put forward. And I know there's some funding in that, which is critical for helping jumpstart local economies. So I'm sure the governor will happily sign that bill as soon as it gets to his desk. And that's another possible source for new funding for cities and towns.
And just additional much needed aid.
Most definitely. Yes, most definitely.
Now, Mayor, you've served the city for quite a while. Like you mentioned, 16 years of collective service. You were first elected to a 2-year term as mayor in 2011 after serving 4 months as an acting mayor. You were then reelected twice in 2013 and in 2017. Before then, though, you served 3 terms on the Northampton City Council, including as city council president. And I'm sure you've had to deal with many challenges while serving as mayor for nearly a decade. The pandemic, like we mentioned, chief among them. but also, stabilizing budgets, getting 2 property tax overrides passed, making housing more affordable in the city. Beyond the pandemic, what were your biggest challenges as mayor?
Yeah, I would say I would say probably the economic challenges are really the biggest issues. I mean, those generally have been the biggest challenges. We've obviously had had storms and power outages and those kinds of events, which are always challenging. And but really, I think the one constant has been just the slow erosion over time. And I've been a very outspoken person about this. And I've, testified before the legislature and testified before, commissions about this, just the way slowly over time, more and more of the burden on funding of local city and town budgets have been shifted to property taxes. So it's made it really challenging for cities and towns as more and more gets pushed onto that. You can sort of track over the last 20 or 30 years, Northampton, used to receive, 35 to 40% of its revenue came from state aid. Now it's down to, less than, 15%. I mean, it's getting to be almost, one of the smallest parts of our revenue. And part of that's because of larger changes in the tax structure, and an attitude that, you can cut taxes and not pay for things, not pay for services and not invest in things. And that somehow the free market is going to provide them. Well, I think certainly the pandemic has exposed the fallacy of that as we now see, our healthcare systems and our social service and our social safety nets, struggling to deal with the human misery that's been created by this pandemic. So, that's probably been the biggest, one of the biggest challenges is, trying to, again, people pay taxes, they want services, they want to, they want good schools, they want their roads plowed, they want their crumbling roads fixed. But it's also, I can also understand it's a challenge when the primary source of funding is a property tax, which is not a very progressive way to tax, but it's really the only tool. So that's probably been the other big challenge that we faced. It's just been sort of an ongoing issue, which is why, twice during my time as mayor, I've eventually had to go to the taxpayers and say, look, this is our situation. Here's all the facts. These are the 2 choices. And thankfully, in both cases, the taxpayers have responded to that and said, yeah, we understand that this is not great. We don't like it. But we also understand that if we want to have high quality city services and schools, that, we have to support them. So that I think that's going to continue to be one of the issues that we face. And I know, hopefully there'll be some reform. I know there was a big report that came out recently, which shouldn't be a big surprise, a big study about trickle-down economics, and basically saying that making tax cuts to the wealthy does not trickle down, does not create economic growth. So I really hope we can get away from that and really just have an honest conversation with voters and with taxpayers about how much it costs to run the services that they want and provide the healthcare and the other supports that they need. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that both property tax overrides, this one this past year and then the one in 2013, I believe, both passed by pretty significant margins. But I remember when you were going ward to ward, promoting the override, trying to express its importance, there are a fair number of residents who, expressed, concern about the override, the cost of it,
Yep.
how much they would have to pay additionally. But then they wound up passing by significant margins, like I mentioned.
Yeah, I get it. I understand it. It's not, and nobody wants to raise their own taxes. And I guess it's just part of the problem is we have this antiquated Proposition 2.5 that basically assumes that the rate of inflation for the cost of the things that we need to do to provide services can be somehow magically capped at 2.5%. And we know healthcare has not risen at 2.5%. We know lots of other things have risen far more than 2.5% a year. So, but I'm appreciative of the taxpayers here in Northampton for understanding that and voting the way they have.
Mm. But you believe a source of that problem is the lack of help from the state?
I think that we need to have a conversation at the state and federal level. And again, you can look at it historically, what percentage of federal and state aid. I mean, right now, we get like less than 1% of our total budget comes from the federal government, for example. And so I feel that economic policies at the federal level and at the state level, frankly, we've tried for years to get a progressive tax system, income tax system in Massachusetts. Unsuccessfully, there was a ballot initiative for a millionaire tax, which would have only taxed dollars above $1 million in income. And so I know that that's going to be a conversation that we revisit. But at the end of the day, these services need to be paid for. Now, I also think we need to diversify our revenue sources, which is, again, one of the reasons why I've been a big supporter of local options. And we've, things like the meals tax and the hotel motel tax, obviously cannabis, Airbnb, ride sharing. So there are some of these new parts of our economy that are providing some other revenue streams, but at very small percentages for local cities and towns. So that's a whole other conversation that I think needs to be had when we look at our tax system.
Absolutely. And on the flip side of the challenges you faced while serving as mayor for nearly a decade, what were the accomplishments that you were most proud of?
Well, there's so many different ones. I mean, when I look out my window here at City Hall and I see Pulaski Park, I mean, Pulaski Park was is a little over an acre park in the heart of our downtown, and had not had any major work done to it since 1976 at the time. And so this was a major initiative in the early part of my administration. We put together through a combination of state grants and CPA funding, a major revisioning process for the park, and spent significant funds to completely not only rebuild and re-envision it, but expand it, make it more accessible, and really made it into a real gem and a showpiece of our downtown, and it really drew people in. So that's a big project that I'm proud of. We've obviously continued to be a leader in sustainability and our work in terms of acknowledging global warming and working on climate mitigation. We've closed our landfill in the early part of my term, and converted it into a solar field. We've been promoting solar and renewables in our business community and our local community. We're in the process right now of completing a major climate mitigation and resiliency study, which basically is going to be a roadmap for the city to reach net neutrality. Not net neutrality. That's an internet thing. To be carbon neutral by 2050, so we're proud of those things. Things like Valley Bike Share, which we've been a leader in pushing. The return of passenger rail to Northampton is something that I'd been a long-time advocate of, and working with my fellow mayors in Holyoke and Greenfield. We got the return of the initial north-south rail, and then lobbied for additional trains. Obviously, again, another thing that the pandemic really disrupted. But there's things like that, and really just investing in affordable housing. Northampton, I'm really proud of the city. We've helped create, support over 350 units of affordable housing during my time in office. Unlike many communities that have put up barriers and made it challenging challenging to create affordable housing. Our city has been very welcoming and very understands that, Northampton needs to be a place that people of all incomes can live. And so, we've been very aggressive in supporting and leveraging, affordable housing, which then spins into economic development. I mean, look at Lower Pleasant Street, another major initiative of our administration, where we've used, MassWorks grants and Safe Streets grants and CDBG funding and CPA funding, leveraged with state funding to help support two major housing agencies in our area, Valley CDC and Wayfinders, to build two beautiful new mixed-use apartment buildings, which are affordable. In some cases, there are some market rate and commercial, and did a major streetscape redesign. So I'm proud of the work we've done, and again, there's a role for government to play in so many areas, and a lot of it's about building partnerships with the nonprofit world, with state government, with private sector, and so I'm proud of those things. Cannabis is another one. I've seen a few posts in recent days about my famous chocolate bar purchase back a few years ago, but Northampton's been a leader in cannabis, and the voters of our city supported both medical and adult use overwhelmingly, and so we've been very aggressive and very progressive about how we've approached that. We didn't impose caps. We have very permissive zoning around it. And so we've seen a lot of people want to locate either their retail shops or their manufacturing or their cultivation sites in Northampton, which again creates good paying jobs, brings people to the city, and helps provide an alternative revenue source other than property taxes. So yeah, there's a long list. Obviously, I've got a year left in office, so I'll have some time to think about and try to summarize those things, and hopefully, create some new accomplishments that I can be proud of. I've got a few other big projects I want to get finished, and some other major initiatives that I want to get done before I leave. But I'm really proud of the work. Not only, it's a we thing, because really the mayor can help lead these initiatives, but it also depends on obviously all of our department heads and employees, but ultimately the residents getting behind these initiatives and helping to move them forward.
Yeah, it certainly takes a village.
Most definitely.
And back to the affordable housing front, I wanted to ask, because I remember, I believe it was in December 2019 or January 2020, when that gigantic report came out about, the number of barriers that Northampton faces to make housing more affordable to residents, people who want to move to the city. And you're mentioning that you have, a lot of projects you want to get done before your term ends. Is that on the bucket list? Is, making housing more affordable in Northampton on that?
Most definitely. I mean, that's been a project and a value, and one of my top priorities that I inherited, from my predecessor, Claire Higgins, who was very much, that was very much part of her agenda as well. And, we did in fact fund that report. And interestingly, it used to be a required report, this fair housing analysis. And sadly, under the current administration, it was actually, taken away as a requirement, but we still decided we were going to do it anyway. So we funded it and basically did a pretty in-depth study of what are the barriers to people being able to access, affordable housing, fairly, and the various things. So actually, just was in communication with the chair of our housing partnership the other day, who's invited me to come to their meeting. They're basically our city body that helped oversee that report and is now going through the report and trying to look at how to implement some of the recommendations. So I know they want to have me come in and talk about some of the items in it that could potentially be advanced with legislation through the city. So definitely, probably one of the maybe legacies that people will remember about me is I'm very much someone who's into planning and to studying issues and developing plans. We've got this resiliency climate resiliency plan. We've got the fair housing plan that we've been doing. We're in the middle of a broadband, a public broadband study. And I really view these things as creating a roadmap, not just for my administration, but for future administrations to tackle some of these big issues and big problems. So I will certainly be doing everything I can to advance them and, go after some of the low-hanging fruit that are accomplishable in the near term, but hopefully being able to hand off to the 45th mayor of Northampton, some clear plans and roadmaps for them to be able to follow to advance these important issues.
Absolutely. I want to bring up not just affordable housing as an issue, but houselessness, because we at MassLive, we published an article pretty recently about all the slew of programs that Northampton has ongoing, help out houseless residents in the city, from a regional task force that you're on, that aims to improve shelters in the community, in the region, actually, along with a warming center that I believe you're working on. Mm-hmm. Could you talk about some of the programs or goals you have in terms of houselessness in the city? Because obviously that's a particular issue, unique, not necessarily unique, but Northampton that constantly looks at.
Most definitely, and I think, I think that this is an incredibly compassionate community, and it's also being the county seat. It's a place where there's a lot of services, social services that have agencies that are available. And so, the city has worked over many, many years to help support and stand up, our 2 homeless shelters that we have in the city, and resource centers and other resources that are available to those that are housing insecure or houseless. And certainly the pandemic, like I mentioned earlier, has definitely exposed the gaps and the challenges that people facing houselessness are dealing with, because with many of the restaurants and libraries and coffee shops and places that typically people could go for a few hours to get out of the weather and some respite, with those being closed, that's created challenges. So, in addition to working with our nonprofit partner ServiceNet to not only support existing shelters, but stand up an expanded shelter so we can increase capacity for the winter. We've worked with Manna Soup Kitchen. We've actually provided all of our food insecurity organizations, Survival Center, Manna, and Grow Food Northampton. We've provided them CARES Act funding during the pandemic to try to help them, because they've stepped up their work to help deal with food insecurity in the community. But this idea of a sort of a community day center, we're calling it a community resilience hub, is still one of the big issues, that one of the big gaps that we had identified in a panhandling work group report that my administration developed a year or so ago, and so that's really come into focus for me now, particularly with the pandemic, as another one of my big initiatives in this final year in office is to try to get that established. And this would be a place that would not only provide shelter during the day, but it would also provide access to services. Because I think we find that people that are facing houselessness, need some stability. They need a roof over their head. They need a shower. They need some sustenance, but they also need help. They need help accessing healthcare. They need help accessing, and sometimes mental health services or substance abuse services, or job services. So we want to try to create this hub that can help provide that kind of support to people that are living on the street or living in a tent in our city. It's I said many times, we're the wealthiest nation in the world, yet we have people that live on our streets, and not just Northampton, obviously, but all over the United States. So I know this is an issue that our community is compassionate about and passionate about. And so it's going to be one of the major pushes in my final year in office, to work on this community resilience hub, in addition to helping support our community partners in all the other ways that we support those who are housing insecure, including creating affordable housing that, ultimately, if you can get somebody who's houseless and get them, supports and get them stabilized and get them, the support they need, we can often then move them into housing. And that's just a game changer for people. Because generally people lose their job, they get behind on rent. We're facing a major eviction crisis here in the state. And I think if we do not grapple with these issues, we're going to be facing an even larger problem in the months to come.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, obviously the coronavirus pandemic has thrust this issue into the spotlight with, like you mentioned, the eviction crisis potentially looming at the state level and nationally. But Mayor, I wanted to ask, you've been serving in your position for close to a decade now. Northampton has changed in a number of ways during your time in office. The Amtrak station expanded through the city. Neta opened only a few years ago, and the face of downtown business district has slowly changed as well, and has changed in just the past few months in response to the pandemic. What are some of the differences that stand out to you in the city? How has it changed over the years?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely, there's definitely been change, and certainly in our downtown, even before the pandemic, Northampton, sort of the renaissance of Northampton that people often talk about, you can kind of track to 40 plus years ago, which was when, maybe surprising to some people, but downtown Northampton was in really rough shape, and there were a lot of empty buildings, and we actually just had a lot of entrepreneurs who came and invested and bought buildings and opened stores. And so what we've seen over the last several years is many of those entrepreneurs, who many describe themselves, as, hippies who went to college here and then opened businesses. Many of those are retiring. Many of those folks are retiring out. I can, go up and down Main Street and think of the people like Kathy Cross or Joe Blumenthal who owned Downtown Sounds. And, I've done so many 40-year proclamations for a lot of our businesses. So in some cases, we've seen those businesses get passed on to another generation. In other cases, they've been sold to new owners. I think of Cornucopia Foods in Thorns, or I think of A to Z Science and Learning, which were founded and run by the same owners for many years, and they ended up selling to their employees. But in other cases, we've had people that have just decided to retire, and there's been no one to step in. So that can be jarring for people. I think of iconic places like Silverscape Designs, that was founded by a young visionary, Dennis Perlman, who tragically died in a plane crash, and then his brother ran the business after his death, and now he's reached retirement age and doesn't want to run the business anymore. Faces is another example. And I think that's just the normal cycle, but it can be jarring for people. I mean, change is jarring for people, and there's obviously concern. But I remain optimistic, and we've tried to be supportive as a city government, and also we have really strong business associations both in Florence and here in downtown Northampton. And again, even during the pandemic, we've had several new stores open. We've had new restaurants open during the pandemic, both in Florence and Northampton. So, we were sort of experiencing a reset of sorts prior to the pandemic. And obviously the pandemic has accelerated that in many ways. But I think we'll still be very well positioned. I mean, just our beautiful historic downtown, which we've really worked hard to put in place, protections to make sure that we maintain the architectural beauty of the downtown. And again, that support for local businesses, and also there are many cultural institutions and art and just the vibrancy there, which we want to see come back. So, I think all the ingredients are always going to be there for Northampton, and we'll get through this challenging period. And yes, there'll be turnover, but there are still people, you can go on Facebook, not just in Northampton, but anywhere. And, they're reminiscing about Woolworths and A&W root beer and, all these stores that used to be here. And I'm sure, I'll be reminiscing about Faces and Silverscape, and there'll be people wondering what those were because, they won't remember them, but there'll be some new business that's there carrying on the tradition. But it's going to be rough, obviously, for the next few years. And not only this mayor, but the next mayor will have to remain, laser focused on it. But obviously our downtowns in Florence and Northampton are the lifeblood of our local economy. So I think that's incumbent upon any mayor to keep their focus on that.
And hopefully new businesses and, like you said, some more self-described hippie entrepreneurs.
Exactly. Yeah. The hippies became, whatever. The baby boomers are all retiring now. So, yeah.
Yeah. And when you complete your term in the fall, you'll be among the city's longest serving mayors. I think that's notable. Before that, you served in the U.S. Air Force and Air National Guard, and later working as a congressional aide in Washington. So a huge portion of your life has been dedicated to public service. What are your plans for after you officially leave office in January 2022? Are you planning on continuing a career in public service?
Yeah, public service has definitely been a big part of my life, and it's something that my parents sort of raised me to get involved in the community and to be involved in the community, and a lot of my brothers and sisters are involved in one way or another in some form of either social services or education or public service. And so I don't know exactly. I don't have a set plan. I don't have a set trajectory in mind. I mean, I'll be still, I think, relatively young. And I think I have some interesting skills and experience to look at what's available, really. I don't have a set path. But I'll be shocked if it's not something in public policy or some form of either nonprofit or government or public policy, because that has been my passion. It was what I majored in college, and I've loved working on these sometimes vexing issues, and I enjoy the opportunity to be able to serve the communities that I live in. So yeah, don't have a set plan. Not looking at any other elected offices, that's for sure. But
I was about to ask, would you consider running for elected office?
No,
again?
And there's some people saying really nice things about me on social media today, but I have no interest in running for public office. I mean, being the mayor to me is the greatest job in politics, and I've worked in Congress and obviously seen other elected officials up close, and I think being a mayor is one of the most important jobs in government. It's on the ground, it's real world. You're with and seeing your constituents, whether you want to or not, on a daily basis, and so exactly. So this is the best job I've ever had and probably will have. But again, I think I have a lot of skills, and so we'll just see what's available. Really, I really just believe in you do the job you're doing, and you do it well, and then when it's time to move on to another job, some new challenge will present itself at the time, and we'll see what that is.
Lastly, Mayor, in your statement, you pledged to work with whomever Northampton voters select to succeed you to ensure a smooth transition in January 2022. Is there anyone you would like to encourage to run, or anyone planning on running you'd like to endorse? I know it's early.
Yeah, no, and part of my reason for announcing so early was, knowing that it's been 10 years since a new mayor, and so I wanted to give the community a little bit of time to digest that and think about that, and give people out in the community time to think about whether they want to run. I mean, we've got a lot of really talented elected officials, appointed officials, and just residents in general. Obviously, I followed a more traditional path of having, been on the city council and, worked my way up through the system. But obviously, as we know that's not the only path to government. So my hope is that there's someone out there that cares about the community and is interested in these issues and is willing to, make a pretty big commitment of their time and their energy and their endurance in some ways, and step forward and run. And I hopefully we'll have a really spirited election and a good. I think elections are really important in terms of the community having a voice in who leads it. And so yeah, no one has emerged. I think hopefully over the next few weeks and months we'll start to hear from people that are interested in looking at the position. And I'll be a resource if people have questions. And obviously I will work with whoever does get elected to make sure that we have a smooth transition in between November and January 2nd of 2022.
Well, I think that's a good plan. Mayor, again, I appreciate you joining me for this conversation. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we end this live interview?
No, just, thank you for the opportunity. And obviously thank you to the residents of Northampton for allowing me the opportunity to serve. And I'm looking forward to finishing out my term strong. And I, of course, would be remiss if I didn't tell people to, make sure you wear your mask and wash your hands and social distance and be safe and have a happy new year.
Thanks again, Mayor. Again, my name is Jackson Cody. I'm a reporter with MassLive. I'm here today with Mayor David Narkewicz of Northampton. Thank you.
Thank you.